Although we were already looking at ways of expanding the work, the day after the presidential election in 2016, those ideas took on a whole new urgency. So when we talk about sanctuary now, we most often are talking about expanded sanctuary. Acts of justice that are much more than a single person or single family in one house of worship. And although we still work with and on physical sanctuary, it's important to know that that's only one strategy, one tactic in the toolbox of what we call expanded sanctuary. The work that we're doing now encompasses a multitude of ways that we work together to protect our communities. So what exactly is expanded sanctuary? Well, to understand that, we need to understand where it's grounded, because another white savior model is not needed. So we're really clear that this is grounded in a different model. Expanded sanctuary is grounded in justice accompaniment. And when we're saying a justice accompaniment as a model, that's talking about accompaniment with a big A. So justice accompaniment is a model that's steeped in collective liberation. Collective liberation is the deep understanding that none of us are free until we are all free. That we all pay a price for the way things are.
That's right.
My liberation is tied to your liberation. And your liberation is tied to my liberation.
See it?
Accompaniment assumes mutual reciprocity. I don't just give to you, I don't just help you. I am helped by you and I receive in return. We are all in need and we are all transformed by our relationships, but only if we can bring our whole selves and only if we're grounded in collective liberation. Accompaniment is not just going along with someone to a meeting, but it's leveraging our privilege to answer the call. Leveraging our privilege and answering the call to stand beside as an ally, as a co-conspirator. To stand behind, offering silent support. Leveraging our privilege, amplifying our partners' voices and messages. To stand between our community and the bad things that are coming at them. There's no place in there that says leading the pack.
Yep.
Accompaniment model means we are responding to someone who's being targeted in that moment, having their back and asking, what would help honor and center someone's dignity in this moment? And how do we change the system so that this work doesn't have to continue happening? As we move forward with expanded sanctuary, it has to be grounded in an accompaniment model, in collective liberation. If not, it's going to slip back into charity, white knight syndrome, and white supremacy culture. So what specifically is expanded sanctuary? It's taking the intent of physical sanctuary and taking it outside into the public sphere, breaking down the limitations of the four walls, or in our case, around a building. So it includes physical sanctuary, which is whether your congregation is providing sanctuary or being a support congregation to another congregation that's doing sanctuary. It's traditional long-term as well as newer options of short-term. Some of short-term sanctuary that we're working on is between 24 and 72 hours. It's also rapid response, sanctuary in the streets, answering a call, generally via text message, to say there is something going on and our community needs to show up because our siblings are in need. And we say, do you need us to stand beside you? Do you need us to stand behind you? Or do you need us to put ourselves between you and the bad things coming at you? It also includes housing hospitality, short-term housing for those who've been released on bond, who are pregnant, or who have young children, asylum seekers, people with loved ones who are in detention, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and particularly transgender, because immigration detention is not a safe place to be your full self. There's also the small a part of accompaniment, when you actually are going with someone and providing a direct help, going with them to court, going with them to an ICE check-in, providing childcare or transportation or financial assistance for their legal fees, for the government fees, or helping to bond them out of immigration detention. Accompaniment is doing what you would do for family, for friends, for people that you care care for, and honor and respect. Sanctuary also means developing community protections, developing accountable relationships. An accountable relationship means that when I've spent too much time at the mic, that my immigrant-led groups can say, Katia, you centered yourself, and as a white woman, we don't need any more of that. And as my face turns red, and as my eyes fill with tears, because that's what happens when I'm embarrassed, I know that it's safe for me to say, thank you, let me learn from that, and try and do better the next time. Because an accountable relationship doesn't expect me to be perfect. It expects me to show up and make it safe for them to tell me when I've done harm. Sanctuary also means developing community protections, participating in Know Your Rights presentations, family safety planning to prevent catastrophic loss in the event of a detention or deportation, participating in detention visitation programs, fighting deportations, which can be anything from posting on Facebook and raising the call there, making phone calls to elected officials, or showing up at protests. And it also means using our prophetic voice. One of the things that I think liberal religions don't do as well as the non-liberal religions is we don't call in our faith and we don't call in our prophetic voice. As a UU, I am called to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and I am called to work for justice and equity and compassion in human relations. Wow, that's incredibly powerful. And if that doesn't say, oh, I know who that person is and what they do, and it's grounded in their faith, then I don't know what would. We need to use that prophetic voice more often. Now, across the U.S., UURISE is working with congregations doing this work. Here in San Diego County, we have 2 congregations who have taken the vote to become a sanctuary congregation: Pilgrim United Church of Christ in Carlsbad and First Unitarian Universalist in Hillcrest. We also have a detention visitation program. There's informal housing hospitality opportunities that we're looking to formalize. And of course, a variety of opportunities to volunteer with UURISE, the North County Immigration Task Force, San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium, and the San Diego Rapid Response Network, to name just a few. So what are you called to do? And how are you called to respond? There's a lot of upcoming events with family safety planning, with the San Diego Rapid Response Network, shifts that you can work, flyers that you can post in your neighborhood. There's housing hospitality for someone who's been bonded out. There's advocacy and activism against anti-poverty measures, for anti-poverty measures, against criminalizing poverty, stopping criminalization in general, and fighting against local policies and ordinances and codes that disproportionately impact the poor, people of color, and immigrants. And let me tell you, this is the hardest one, because those policies and codes and ordinances are often the ones that we think of that make our neighborhood prettiest and help increase the equity in our home. Part of collective liberation, knowing that my liberation is tied to your liberation, is also being willing to say, what am I willing to give up? What part of my privilege can I let go of so that someone else can rise with me? If I'm rising and just helping someone else rise, it doesn't change. If I'm willing to give up some of my privilege, then we can rise together. On Friday evening, Reverend Beth and Angela and I met with a group of activists to discuss possible expanded sanctuary opportunities in response to Operation Streamline, the draconian tactic that results in over 30 immigrants appearing in court together, charged with the zero-tolerance crime of entering the United States. It doesn't matter if they lawfully presented themselves seeking asylum or if they are fleeing impossible circumstances. Right now, everyone is being treated as a criminal and everyone's being treated as an animal and being hoarded in groups. So the government is unhappy that the public defenders assigned to defend the criminal part of the case were using the government's conflicting policies on immigration to their advantage. So now the government changed their whole tack, and we're going to be working to identify people who can accept custodianship of someone who has been bonded out, of an immigrant who's been bonded out, or to help with transportation and advocacy and finances. In other words, as of Friday, we're expanding the definition of sanctuary again and trying to figure out exactly what that means. Sanctuary is more than a building. It is much, much more. It calls people of faith and conscience to join in the justice struggle. So how are you called? And when you're called, will you answer?